The silent hunger. The sun never truly rose on colonies at A9. The sky was always gray, lit by artificial light towers that buzzed like tired bees. In the narrow alley behind the fuel station, the air smelled like oil, smoke, and old food. No one came back here unless they had to. But today, someone was here. She was thin, bones sharp under her silver-blue skin. Her eyes were sunken, glowing faintly. Her clothes were torn, dirty, and far too small for the cold wind that slid between the metal buildings. She was an alien, one of the Velari, and she was digging through a trash bin like a desperate animal. In her arms, wrapped in cloth and shaking, was a baby. The child didn't cry. Its eyes, tiny glowing orbs, were dull, too tired even to whimper. People passed the alley. Some turned their heads quickly. Others just stared in silence, then walked faster. No one stopped, until one man did. His name was Elias, a human, a mechanic with rough hands and oil-stained boots. He had just finished fixing a transport ship and was heading home when he heard a strange rustling noise. He looked down the alley, curious. He froze. There she was, kneeling beside the trash, pulling out a half-eaten food pack. Her hands were shaking as she tore it open with her teeth. She didn't eat. She looked down at her baby and tried to feed it. The baby didn't respond. Elias stepped closer. "Hey, are you okay?" The alien mother flinched and backed away fast, clutching the child close. She hissed, her glowing eyes wide with fear. "It's okay," Elias said quickly, holding up his hands. "I'm not gonna hurt you." She didn't understand his words, but his calm voice made her pause. Her body still shook, ready to run, but she didn't move yet. Elias slowly reached into his bag and pulled out a protein bar. It wasn't much, but it was clean and sealed. He placed it on the ground and stepped back. She stared at the bar, then at him, still unsure. Then the baby coughed, a soft, dry sound that made her panic. She grabbed the bar and bit it open, gently feeding small pieces to the child. Elias watched. He felt something twist in his chest. "Where's your people?" he asked quietly. "Why are you out here like this?" She didn't answer. Suddenly, a red beam swept down the alley. A patrol drone. It hovered above and scanned the area. When it locked onto the alien mother, it spoke in a cold, robotic voice. Subject: Velari. Identity confirmed. Status: escaped war criminal. Alerting authorities. Elias blinked in shock. War criminal. The alien mother gasped and crouched lower, covering her baby. Her glowing hands pressed against the baby's chest, whispering something in her own language. Footsteps echoed from the alley entrance. 2 colony soldiers rushed in, weapons ready. "Move aside, sir," one shouted at Elias. "She's a wanted fugitive." Elias didn't move. He looked down at the terrified mother. Her eyes were full of fear, not anger. She didn't look dangerous. She looked broken. "Are you sure?" Elias asked the soldiers. "She's got a baby. She's starving. She's Velari." "They're all dangerous," the soldier snapped. "Now step away." Elias didn't move. Then the baby started glowing. A red light pulsed from its chest. The ground shook. The trash bin rattled. The drone above sparked and fell to the ground with a thud. The soldiers raised their weapons. The alien mother screamed, but not in anger, in fear. Elias dropped to his knees and reached for the baby. "It's okay. I can help." As his hand touched the child's skin, a jolt shot through his arm. It wasn't painful, but powerful. His veins lit up. His vision blurred. He saw flashes, strange images of stars, war, fire, and pain. And then he heard the baby's voice in his mind. "Help, please." His heart stopped. He looked up. The soldiers had fallen, unconscious. The drone was dead. The alley was silent again. The alien mother looked at Elias like he was a ghost. He took a deep breath. What just happened? The baby glowed softly now. Its eyes were open. It looked calm. Then Elias heard a sharp beep from the soldier's radio. A voice crackled through. "We've lost contact. Deploying backup. Capture the Velari and any human helping her." Elias stood up, still shaking. He looked down at the alien mother and her child. They needed help. Real help. And now he was involved, whether he wanted to be or not. He held out his hand to her. "Come with me. I'll get you out of here." She looked at him. This time, she didn't flinch. Slowly, she reached out and took his hand, fugitive of the past. The alley was quiet, but Elias's mind wasn't. His heart raced as he led the alien mother and her child through the back streets of Colony Zeta 9. Shadows moved in every corner, and the air felt heavy with warning. The mother, Virel, he would soon learn, moved quickly beside him, holding her baby close as if afraid the world would steal him away. Elias had no plan, just instinct. He took her into the lower levels of the colony, far from the patrol routes. These tunnels used to be used by miners, now forgotten, and half-collapsed. No cameras, no drones, just silence and rusted steel. In a small dark corner of the Undercity, they stopped. Elias handed her a thermal blanket he had grabbed from his storage box. She took it with both hands and bowed her head, eyes filled with something he couldn't quite read. Shame, maybe, or gratitude buried under fear. The baby was calmer now, glowing gently. Its small chest moved with steady breaths. Elias crouched and opened his old emergency kit, offering water, some protein paste, and a handheld translator he hadn't used in years. He held it out to her and spoke slowly. "What's your name?" Virel hesitated, then pressed a button on the device and spoke in her native tongue. Her voice was soft, broken. After a short pause, the device crackled and translated. "I am Virel, medic. Velari warship, escaped." She looked at him, eyes trembling. "Please, I am not fighter. I never fight. I save." The words hit Elias like a cold wind. A medic, a mother on the run. He sat down across from her, the metal floor cold beneath him. "They said you're a war criminal," he said, his voice low. The translator took a second to repeat the message. Virel's face twisted in pain, her arms hugging the baby tighter. She shook her head. Then she pointed to a long, faded scar on her shoulder and tapped the translator again. "I was punished by my own. I broke orders. I healed humans. They called me traitor." Her voice cracked. "I ran. I hid. I had no food. I gave what I could to my child." Elias stared at her, trying to make sense of everything. So many people still hated the Velari. The war had ended years ago, but the wounds were still open. No one trusted the other side. But this wasn't a soldier. This was a mother who had risked her life to save people, both alien and human, and was now starving in a trash bin, hunted like a monster. The baby shifted in her arms and made a soft sound, almost like a sigh. Virel stroked its head gently. "He is different," she said, touched by old tech, half-light. "I don't know why. His father was human." Elias blinked. "What?" He leaned forward. "The baby's father was human." Virel nodded slowly. "He saved me. Long ago. During battle. He died. But he stayed. In this one." She touched her child's chest. "His light lives here." Elias didn't understand everything, but something deep inside him stirred. He remembered his own brother, a soldier who had died in that same war, a war that had taken too much from everyone. He never thought he'd help a Velari, but here he was, protecting one. Suddenly, a loud beep echoed in the distance. Elias's eyes darted to the entrance of the tunnel. The patrols were scanning nearby. He helped Virel to her feet. "We need to move again." But before they could go, the baby reached out and touched Elias's arm. A warm light spread across his skin, and in an instant, he saw something. An image, a memory, not his own. A battlefield. Smoke, fire, and a tall human soldier standing in front of a wounded Velari medic, shielding her with his own body as explosions lit up the sky. The memory faded as fast as it came. Elias gasped. His arms still glowed faintly. Virel stared at him in shock. "You saw." He nodded slowly, stunned. "That was... the baby showed me." He looked down at the child. "How is that possible?" Virel's voice was soft now, almost a whisper. "He is bonded, not just to me, now to you." She looked afraid again. "You touched his heart. He chose you." Footsteps echoed above them. Drones buzzed faintly in the distance. Time was running out. Elias looked at her, then the child, then the narrow tunnel ahead. He didn't know what this bond meant or why the child had chosen him, but one thing was clear. They were out of time. The colony believed Virel was dangerous. And now, they'd think he was too. "We're leaving," Elias said, pulling his coat tighter. "We're not going to let them take you." And just like that, a mechanic and a hunted alien mother became fugitives, tied together by an innocent child with glowing eyes, and a story that could change the future of both their species. The Forgotten Weapon. The tunnels under Colony Zeta 9 were like a forgotten maze. Broken lights flickered above, casting shadows that twisted along the rusted walls. Elias moved fast, guiding Virel and her child deeper underground, far from scanners and patrol routes. He had no map, no plan, only instinct and adrenaline. Behind them, the colony tightened its grip. A human man bonded to a Velari child. That alone would draw attention. But the real danger wasn't just attention. It was fear. Something had changed when the child touched him. Elias could still feel it, a warmth that pulsed gently in his chest, like a second heartbeat. His mind was filled with flickers of alien memories, colors and shapes that didn't belong in any human brain. But they didn't hurt. They didn't scare him. They just whispered truths he didn't understand yet. They finally stopped in an old maintenance bunker, forgotten since the early days of the colony. Dust lay thick on the control panels, and vines pushed through cracks in the metal walls. It was quiet here, safe, for now. Virel sat near a broken generator, cradling her child. She hummed softly, a lullaby in her language, almost musical. Elias watched them both. The child's glow had changed. It no longer pulsed red with panic. Now it shimmered like soft amber light. Peaceful, curious. And when the child looked at Elias, something deep in him responded. It was like looking into a mirror that showed not your face, but your soul. "I've never seen anything like this," Elias said, sitting down across from her. "What is he?" Virel looked up slowly, her silver-blue face pale under the dim light. "He is Velari, but more. He is touched by old tech, ancient light, something from the deep stars." She hesitated, then added, "We do not understand it either." "Ancient tech." Elias frowned. "Like a weapon." Her eyes dropped to the ground. "Yes and no." She explained slowly through the old translator. Long ago, before the war, before the humans even met the Velari, there had been a time when energy itself was alive, linked to mind and emotion. Some called it spirit tech. Some called it light bonding. Only a few could connect to it. It was rare and dangerous. Most who tried to use it burned out, but the ones who succeeded, they were called binders. Elias listened, heart pounding. "You're saying your child is one of them?" Virel nodded. "He was born with it, because his father was human. The light in him listens to you now." The weight of that truth pressed down on Elias. He remembered the jolt when the child touched him, the vision, the strange calm afterward. It wasn't just emotion. It was connection, a bond, and maybe more. Suddenly, The old comm screen on the wall blinked to life. Static filled the air, and then a sharp voice cut through. To all citizens, be advised, human fugitive Elias Ward is now considered armed and dangerous. He is believed to be bonded with alien tech. Capture is authorized by any means. Repeat, any means. The scream died again. The silence that followed was louder than the message. Elias leaned back against the cold metal wall, trying to breathe. They think I'm a weapon now. Virel didn't speak. She just looked at him, with pity, not fear. I'm not a soldier, he whispered. I'm a mechanic. I fix engines. I don't fight wars. The child reached out toward him. His tiny fingers brushed Elias's hand, and in that moment, something deep inside Elias shifted. Not pain, not fear, just clarity. The same kind of clarity he felt years ago, when he pulled a man out of a burning wreck during a gas explosion. The same feeling when he chose to step into the alley that day. He wasn't a weapon. He was a protector. A sudden knock echoed from the tunnel entrance. 3 sharp hits. Elias grabbed the metal pipe he brought from the junk pile and motioned for Virel to stay back. He crept toward the door, heart racing. But it wasn't soldiers. It was a young woman, human, eyes sharp, hair tied back, carrying a radio on her belt. She raised her hands. I'm not with them. Name's Juno. I monitor old comms. I heard the broadcast. I know where you are. Elias didn't lower the pipe. So what do you want? She looked past him. At the glowing child in Virel's arms, her eyes widened slightly, but not with fear. I want to help. He narrowed his eyes. Why? She smiled, tired and sad. Because I saw what he did. That drone in the alley, it didn't explode. It shut down without damage. That's not a weapon. That's something new. Elias stepped aside slowly. Juno entered the bunker, her eyes on the child. That baby's going to change everything, she whispered. And Elias knew then, this wasn't just about survival anymore. The child in Virel's arms wasn't a threat. He was the future, the hunted and the hidden. The next few days passed in whispers and shadows. The bunker, hidden beneath layers of dust and rust, became a small world of its own, a fragile pocket of warmth in a cold, suspicious colony. Elias fixed up the broken systems, using old wires and spare power cells to bring back light and heat. Juno came and went like a ghost, careful to avoid patrols. She brought food, filtered water, and updates from the outside. Each report was worse than the last. Search drones now scanned the Undercity. The reward for Elias had doubled. Virel's image was everywhere, her face used as a warning. Dangerous, alien, unstable. But inside the bunker, the truth was different. Elias sat across from her one night, watching her child sleep. The baby now smiled often, made curious sounds, and tried to crawl toward the old console blinking with blue lights. His glow had changed again, no longer red or amber, but soft white, like moonlight. Elias felt it every time the child touched him. A warmth, a stillness. He didn't understand it, but he no longer feared it. Virel spoke more now. Her voice was quiet, her words still halting through the translator. But her meaning was clear. He grows strong, she said one evening, gently brushing her hand over her child's forehead. Too strong to stay hidden long. Elias nodded. We'll figure something out. But deep down, he wasn't sure. The colony had made up its mind. He and Virel weren't people anymore. They were stories, warnings, threats. The public didn't care about the truth. They only believed what they were shown. And yet, not everyone turned away. Juno introduced Elias to a few others. Quiet rebels, people with secrets and scars. They were a mix of humans and aliens, survivors of the war who had been left behind by both sides. They met in the deeper tunnels, trading stories and survival tips. They didn't care about the bounty. They listened. They asked questions, Some even smiled at the glowing child, calling him Starborn. In the dim light of that lost world, Elias began to believe again, not in governments, not in rules, but in people, in choices. Still, danger crept closer. One night, as cold wind howled through the broken pipes, Juno burst into the bunker with fear in her eyes. "They know," she said. "Not everything, but enough. The patrols are searching the old mining levels. We have to move. Now." Elias stood quickly. Virel, already holding her child, waited for him to decide. He could see it in her eyes. She trusted him now. Not just because he had helped, but because, in a world that had only shown her fear and cruelty, Elias had done something different. He had stayed. They gathered their things, what little they had, and followed Juno through dark corridors and narrow vents. The sound of boots echoed above them. Flashlights pierced the cracks in the ceiling. Once they had to press themselves against a wall, not breathing, as a drone passed just inches from their heads. Finally, they'd reached an abandoned transport shaft. The lift was broken, long dead. But Elias found a way to power the emergency pulley. It took effort, pain, and half a battery pack. But the rusted platform moved. Slowly, groaning, it lowered them into a part of the colony no one dared to visit anymore, the root zone. It was the oldest part of Zeta 9, built before the war, back when humans and Thalari first arrived. Now it was overgrown, flooded, forgotten. But it was safe. No cameras, no sensors, only echoes of the past. There, in the wet ruins of a failed piece, they made a new camp. Virel lit small crystals that glowed blue and placed them around their shelter. Elias repaired the water filters. The baby giggled as he crawled across mossy floor tiles that once belonged to a diplomacy hall. Juno looked around and whispered, "They tried to build something good here once." Elias nodded. "Maybe we still can." But just as hope began to return, something changed. That night, the baby cried, not from hunger or pain, but from fear. His glow flared bright, lighting the whole room. Virel held him close, whispering comfort, but the child wouldn't calm. Elias leaned in. "What's wrong?" And then came the sound. A faraway hum. Low, steady, growing. Juno's eyes went wide. "That's a scanner sweep, from above. They're using military-grade detection. They're not just searching anymore." Elias stood slowly, heart pounding. "They're hunting." The child clung to him, pressing a glowing hand to his chest. And in that moment, Elias understood something terrifying. They weren't just after the child. They were after what the child awakened inside him. Alliance of the broken. The root zone breathed like a dying beast, old metal groaning, vines creaking, wind sliding through broken glass windows, once used for peace talks between species now long divided. But inside the collapsed hall of whispers, something stirred again. Not fear, not hatred. Something rare, something long buried under the weight of war, unity. Elias stood near the flickering light of a cracked console, watching Virel rock her child gently in her arms. The boy's glow had softened again, but his eyes, wide and alert, tracked every shadow, every breath. He wasn't just sensing danger, he was sensing change. And Elias felt it too, pulsing through the invisible tether that now bound them together. He didn't know the rules of this bond, only that it was real, and getting stronger. Juno returned just before dawn, soaked from the flooded upper tunnels, her hands trembling slightly as she pushed open the hatch. She wasn't alone. Behind her stepped two more figures, one tall, broad-shouldered, with gray skin and glowing tattoos on his arms. The other smaller, human, her left eye replaced with a tech lens that blinked softly. "Don't worry," Juno said quickly. "They're with us. Survivors, like us." The tall alien spoke first, voice deep but calm. "Name's Rolk. Used to fight. Don't anymore. Heard you're protecting the Lightborn." Elias didn't answer right away. He looked at Virel, who nodded slowly, a quiet sign of trust. "He's just a child," Elias said finally. "But they think he's a weapon. And now, maybe they think I am too." The woman with the tech eye stepped forward. "That's exactly why they're afraid. Because you bonded with something they can't control. And that makes you powerful." Elias didn't feel powerful. He felt tired. But he didn't say it. Instead, he listened. Over the next few hours, the newcomers shared stories. Shocking, heartbreaking, human. Rolk had been a Velari soldier ordered to destroy human supply lines. He disobeyed, helped civilians escape instead. For that, he'd been branded a coward by his people and hunted by humans. The woman, Naira, had once been a communications officer for the colony. She leaked orders about forced relocations, got fired, blacklisted, erased. Now they lived in the cracks of Zeta-9, like forgotten pages from a book no one wanted to finish reading. They called themselves the Broken Alliance. Not a rebellion, not a resistance, just people who had been crushed by systems that promised peace but delivered silence. Juno stood beside Elias and whispered, "They'd survived this long by staying small, hidden. But now, for the first time in years, they're willing to stand again. For him." She nodded toward the child, now sleeping in Virel's arms. Elias looked around at these lost souls and felt something rise in his chest. Not fear this time, but purpose. Maybe they couldn't win a war. Maybe they weren't soldiers anymore. But they could do one thing that mattered. Protect this child. This living symbol of what the future could be, if anyone dared to dream it. That night, they made a plan. No more running. They would send a signal, something the colony couldn't ignore. Using Naira's tech skills, they would patch into the old broadcast tower buried under the root zone. If they could reactivate it, they could stream across all colony screens, override the firewalls, and show the truth. Not just a message, a memory. The child could do more than glow. He could share. The vision Elias had seen, of the human soldiers shielding Virel, of compassion during the war, that vision could be projected. The colony would see the real story. The war, the bond, the truth. It was risky, dangerous. They had no way of knowing if it would work, but it was all they had. While Naira prepped the signal and Rolk rigged old power cells to boost the signal range, Elias sat quietly with Virel and her child. He spoke softly, not expecting a reply. "You didn't ask for any of this, but you're here, and you're still standing." Virel looked at him, her voice gentle. "You are too." He nodded, eyes on the child. "Maybe that's enough." Outside, the patrols were already closing in. Drones swarmed the sky, soldiers sweeping the tunnels. The timer had begun. But inside the root zone, beneath the rubble of a failed dream, something new was building. Not fear, not rage. Hope. And this time, it had a glow. Last stand at dawn. The old broadcast tower groaned like a dying titan as the Broken Alliance worked to breathe life back into its rusted bones. Every wire they connected felt like a final heartbeat. Every screen they tested flickered with static, then dimmed, like the machine itself wasn't sure whether the world deserved to hear the truth anymore. But still, they kept going, because dawn was coming. And so were the soldiers. Elias stood at the top of the tower, the colony sprawling far below in dull gray and distant flickers of synthetic daylight. He watched the transport ships land, saw the marching lines of armored patrols forming near the outer wall. The government had made its decision. There would be no trial, no talks, only fire. In less than an hour, the area around the root zone would be sanitized. The order was already signed. A final sweep, a final silence. Inside, the child's glow had changed again. It wasn't fear anymore. It was brightness, steady, strong, and impossibly warm, like sunrise made of light and memory. Virel held him tightly, whispering old Velari lullabies, but she too could feel it. The child was awake in a new way. Aware, listening to more than just the world around him. He was feeling the emotions of the people near him. Elias's resolve, Juno's defiance, Roke's regret, Naira's pain, and most of all, Virel's love. "He's ready," Virel said, her voice quiet but full of something unshakable. Naira gave the signal. The transmitter was hot. The backup cells were barely holding charge. But the system was live. All they needed now was the truth. Elias knelt in front of the child and opened his mind. He didn't know how, only that when the boy touched his hand, the connection happened, like opening a door that had always been there. He felt his memories swirl. His brother's funeral, the day he left the army, the first time he repaired a ship engine and made something broken fly again. The child reached deeper and found it, the vision. The one burned into Elias's soul. And then it happened. The tower pulsed with light. Across Colony Zeta 9, screens froze. Ads disappeared. Surveillance feeds blacked out. Every single monitor, display window, and hologram flared with an image. Not a warning, not a threat. A memory. A glowing child held in the arms of a dying Velari medic, a human soldier stepping between her and enemy fire. His arms wide, his eyes calm, his death instant, his sacrifice complete. And then, peace. A soft voice in every language, every dialect, whispered the same message. Not enemy, not weapon, just a child. The world watched. Some cried, some rage, some refused to believe. But it didn't matter anymore. Because something else happened too. The drones stopped moving. The soldiers halted mid-step. Their helmets buzzed with static, then went silent. One by one, men and women lowered their weapons, stunned not by orders, but by something else. Emotion. Clarity. That simple, aching truth that had been buried for too long. The war was over, so why were they still killing like it wasn't? In the control room, Juno whispered, "It's working." But the system couldn't hold. Sparks erupted from the panels. The tower shook. Fire licked the base. They had pushed it too far. Outside, distant engines roared. Warships. The real weapons. Not soldiers with rifles, but machines built to erase entire zones. Virel stood, still holding her child. Her eyes locked with Elias. "No more running," she said. Elias nodded. "No more hiding." The sky cracked open. Missiles fell. The ground trembled. But before the impact came, the child lifted one small hand, eyes glowing pure white. A wave of energy exploded outward, silent, bright, infinite. Time paused. Missiles froze midair. Dust hung motionless. People gasped, but couldn't move. And then the missiles unraveled. Like paper in the wind, they crumbled into dust. Across the colony, people watched in stunned silence as the light receded, and nothing remained but peace. Elias fell to his knees, his head spun, his heart pounding. But they were alive, all of them. The soldiers turned away. The warships left orbit. And the world changed because one child refused to be a weapon, and one human refused to walk away. The spark of change. The silence after the storm was the loudest thing the colony had ever heard. No sirens, no commands, no gunfire, just stillness. In the heart of the ruined broadcast tower, Elias sat with his back against a shattered wall, arms heavy, eyes wet. He wasn't sure how long he had been sitting there, only that something inside him had shifted forever. Around him, dust settled like snow. The floor was scorched, the air thick with the metallic scent of burned circuits. But he was alive. They all were. Across from him, Virel knelt, her head bowed low, her child asleep in her arms. The boy no longer glowed with wild, unpredictable energy. Now his light was soft, gentle, as if the world no longer needed to be warned of his power. The child had chosen mercy, not because he had to, but because he could. Above ground, the people of Colony Zeta 9 emerged from their homes and shelters, blinking into a new dawn that felt different. Something invisible had passed through them all. Not just light, not just shock, but truth. They had seen it, felt it, the memory, the sacrifice, the child's voice in their minds, a weapon who wanted peace, a fugitive who only wanted to feed her son, a human who dared to reach out a hand instead of pulling a trigger. And it changed something in them. Not everyone believed it. Some still whispered of tricks, of propaganda, of enemy tricks cloaked in soft voices. But most simply stood in silence, holding their children tighter, staring up at the sky, wondering how close they had come to losing everything. In the following days, the government issued no official statement. There were no arrests, no punishment, but also no more attacks. The warships retreated to orbit. The patrols were called back. The bounty on Elias vanished without a trace, and for the first time since the war ended, humans and Velari walked the same streets in the open, cautious, curious, no longer hiding. A week later, in the center of the root zone, the broken alliance cleared out the old diplomacy chamber. Not to restart a government, not to declare victory, but to host a gathering. A quiet meeting. No speeches, no uniforms. Just people, human and alien, sitting in a circle, sharing food, stories, tears, and at the center of it all, on a handmade woven mat, sat the child. His glow now pulsed with each word spoken in kindness, each truth told without fear. It was as if the light inside him fed on healing, on connection, on the fragile hope of peace. Elias stayed nearby, never far from the boy. He no longer questioned the bond. It was part of him now. The child didn't speak often, but when he did, it was never in just one voice. It was many voices, blended memories, thoughts woven together. One day, he looked at Elias with bright eyes and said simply, "You are the one who stayed." And Elias, a man who had never imagined himself a hero, understood. He had stayed when others turned away, when the world demanded silence, when fear screamed louder than compassion. He had stayed, and it mattered. Months passed. Slowly, carefully, a new settlement began to rise from the ashes of the root zone. Not a colony, not a fortress, something smaller, something human. It was built by those who no longer cared about sides, only survival and a future that included everyone. The Velari, who had once hidden in tunnels, now helped construct homes. Humans taught them how to repair engines, fix systems, share crops. And the Velari, gifted with ancient knowledge, taught humans how to read energy not just as power, but as emotion, how to listen without speaking. It was a quiet exchange, an invisible rebuilding, not the kind history books are written about, but the kind that saves lives. Virel, once hunted across the stars, now stood tall among her people. She trained new medics. She taught children. And when asked why she stayed, why she risked everything, she would only smile and say, "Because my son chose light." And so did a human. Elias never returned to the surface colony. He stayed in the new village, working with his hands, fixing what others thought was broken. He laughed more now. He slept better. And some nights, he sat beside the child, now walking, now talking, full of life, and watched the stars. One night, as wind passed gently through the metal bones of the old tower, the child asked him, "What is peace?" Elias looked at him for a long time before answering. "Peace is when you're no longer afraid to be kind." The child nodded, as if that made sense, as if that was enough. And maybe, in the end, it was.